Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to another recording for S3 ICT. So just a brief recap and also further clarification. So we've been talking about classes and IDs. These are two types of selectors. Remember, we talked about them last week. We also said that they have certain similarities. First, both of them are used to identify HTML elements that you want to style. Okay, you use them for targeting particular HTML elements, but they are more specific compared to, especially compared to tag selectors. So if there is a tag selector already in the code and you use a class selector or an ID selector, either of these, a class or an ID, will override more general styling, that you can do with a tag selector. It's also good to remember that some of the tags have a predefined CSS style or CSS styles, okay? And these default styles are applied by the browser. If you look at the developer tool, you can actually see that once you use a class or ID selector, that selector would override the more general default selector. Okay, so there's a default selector applied by the browser. Sorry, there's a default style applied by the browser. But if you use a tag selector, that tag selector will override the default. And then if you use a class or ID selector, this will override the tag selector. Now, but there are also differences between classes and IDs. So, and this is very important to understand. A particular ID can only be used once in a page. More specifically, this means that you can have more than one ID. Okay, you can use multiple IDs, but you can only use one ID for one element. Okay, or to say it differently, an HTML element can have more than one class, but it can only have one ID. So in the case of ID selectors, one element, one ID. In the case of class selectors, one element, multiple class selectors are possible. Okay. So you can have one ID. You can only have one ID, but an element can take on more than one class. So for instance, suppose that you want to change the shape of your salad image. You can do this by adding another class, in the image element. So for instance, you can type in, let's say that you're targeting your salad, you can type in salad, next to salad, sorry, and type in circular, okay? So you can apply this to the line in your HTML. So let me just see. So it's here. Okay, that's my HTML file, and I added circular. Okay. Now go into your CSS file and target the circular class. Okay, you need to type this in, dot circular curly brace border radius colon 100%. That means the border, I mean your image will have a round border. Your image is going to appear circular. Okay, it's going to be round. Then semicolon there and a closing curly brace. Okay, let's take a look at what happens. So I'm now here in my CSS file. This is what I typed in, as you can see. So a full stop, the word circular, curly brace, border radius, colon, 100%. That means 100% round, semicolon, closing curly brace. Okay, let's now check the web page. This is the web page. I'm going to refresh. You see, it's not very obvious, but here it's actually circular. The borders are circular. Okay, so that's what you should have. So what you've done is actually you've applied two classes to the same element. Because if you go back to your HTML file, you see you have two class selectors there. Two class selectors applied to a single element, which is the image element or pictures. Okay, remember this circular is here. That has been applied. That's the class selector that has been applied to your HTML element here. Okay, so more than one class applied to the same element, but you cannot do this with the ID. So just as an example, suppose you type big, the word big to your H1 line. Okay, and then you also add that to your CSS file. If you look at the developer tool, actually what's going to happen is that the ID styling for H1 is going to be crossed out because it has become an invalid ID. You cannot have more than one ID, okay, for one particular element. So like I said, if you typed in big here, added another ID to one particular element, H1, and then you go to the what do you call this, the CSS file, and you type this in, something like this. Okay, that's an ID selector, just suppose. Now go to your web page. What you will see is that this is supposed to be, that this used to be white and now it is red. Okay, what does that mean? This means that the styling, um, the styling, the styling here, as you can see, this has been canceled. This has been crossed out. You can even check this in the developer tool. If you click inspect, you will see that this particular styling has been canceled because the addition of this has rendered that invalid. So this has now become invalid. That's why. So if you reverse the process, I'll remove that, Control S, and then I'll go to my CSS. I will remove this. Okay, I'll save that. I come back to this, I refresh this. So you can see the original styling has come back because it's no longer canceled. It's still valid. So the point is that we're trying to make is that you can only have one ID applied to one element. That's it. You know, in contrast to the possibility of applying more than one class to one particular element. Now, the last thing I would like to discuss here is pseudo classes. You can check this out on the Mozilla Developer Tool. So it's here, pseudo classes. That's a little bit slow. I'll come back here. A good example and a very popular one that's often used is the hover pseudo class. As you can see here, it's a slightly different because it uses a colon. There's a colon there, you see? So these are properties that have a colon in front. You can have, before I continue there, let me just show you this. So you can look for it here on MDN Pseudo Classes. As you can see, what they give you is hover, and you have other pseudo classes on here. Okay, you can check that out for yourself. So by using a pseudo class, you can have the styling, the CSS, change based on the state of um, a particular element. So for instance, the state of whether the cursor, you see this moving thing, that's the cursor, the mouse cursor, is hovering over a picture or not. Okay, you can change a particular element based on whether there's a hovering thing, over the picture. Like I said, the most common, one of the most common pseudo class is hover, and you can also check that out here. I'll come back to that. Okay, so what we can do is apply the pseudo class. Okay, let's see here, the pseudo class hover. So it selects any element when hovered. So that means when the cursor is over that particular element. Okay, so we'll try to apply that. You can go to your Bacon CSS file, and next to this, next to image type, hover. Okay, colon. You need to have a colon there, and then the word hover. So it has to appear like this: img colon hover curly brace background color, say red. Let's change it to gold so it's clearer. Then you can save your CSS file, go back to your web page and click refresh, and then to test whether it works or not, you have to hover over your bacon and salad images. Okay, so like I said, next to this here, this element here, type colon hover, and then all the rest, change the color to something more noticeable. Let's say gold. Okay, save it, Control S. Then go to your web page here. If I hover over that, as you can see, the background color is gold. Okay, by the way, I just noticed that maybe my screen was too small. I didn't really capture this before, but as you can see, the original for this heading, the original styling for this heading is evident. When I applied the ID selector to the H1, the second one, okay, it canceled the original styling. This is what I wanted to show you. Okay, I hope that's clear. Now let me go back to PowerPoint. So I hope you tested that by yourself, and you could see that the background color here that we tried to implement would be visible on your web page. Now, I would like you to upload a copy of your HTML and CSS file, to Teams, to this folder here. Remember that you had to do two things. You had to make one of your pictures circular, and you had to make the background color gold. Okay,